It's the Private Practice Playbook. It's the Private Practice Playbook.
Well, welcome to the podcast. So I feel like the last time we did a podcast, I invited you to come to the Practice Growth Summit in Nashville. And I hate to say I told you so, but we had one of the most fun events I've done in my career. I had some incredible speakers, Mel Robbins, Jesse Itzler, Donald Miller. It's an incredible lineup. And, you know, it's funny, I'm recording this a week after. So I was thinking about actually a few people who listen to the podcast came. I know it's a big commitment. But it was an incredible kind of a celebration of, you know, people engaging their teams, working on team culture. And so I thought what I would do today is share with you a little bit of the opening concepts of that would help you to, you know, it sort of set the stage for the entire event. So I'm going to run through some of that with you today. And, you know, when we do these events, and I do, not every year, I'll take next year off, we'll come back and do another one in 26, but there's an enormous amount of thought that goes into setting up a 3-day event in the sense of, you know, the opening conversation and then making each of the speakers make sense. And obviously we're talking about growth. This particular event was about growth, and we had doctors and team members there. But, you know, when you think about it, we're all human beings. So I want to walk through this. And I'm always reminded, you know, I had this interesting mix of people who really didn't know us at the event, and then, you know, sometimes 20 plus year clients, right? And I have to satisfy everybody. And a few things really stood out to me. And at one point we did a panel, and we had, you know, we have a program called 5X where we take practices 5 times larger. And so that panel was speaking, and the interviewer kept saying, you know, take me back to the day that you became a client. Take me back to the mentality of when you joined 5X and then took them to current day. And I was just sitting in the back of the room and just observing this entire process. So I was thinking a lot about, you know, you guys and podcast subscribers and then thinking about how the beginning of this event links to this issue, and so they would tell these stories, and they would say, well, and here were the following things. They would describe being referred by multiple people to me. I mean, you know, like they'd be like, my mentor referred me to you, 3 people that I really respect, and you know, they would share this overwhelming, you know, the story about people close to them had referred them, but they didn't do anything, right? So, you know, so someone had told them about me or about our company, but they never pursued it, right? And I just thought that's so weird. And so, and this is a recurring story. And then something happened, like they sort of like got frustrated and then they made a move, and then, you know, we started doing business together, and then the story changes dramatically from there. And as I was setting up to do this event and thinking I have these incredible speakers all with diverse topics, and I wanted to put a theme together. And so I put this theme together, and then as I'm in the middle of the event and I'm listening to these panels, I'm going, wow, that's exactly what I was describing. So I want to walk through it with you real quick. So if you think about this, and I'll go through this kind of quickly for the sake of time, but try to be very thorough with it, right? And so you say, well, Jay, okay, what does this have to do with me? Well, what it has to do with you is it has to do with the fact that, so I want you to think about this. So the number one thing that is true is the number one saboteur of all people is their judge. And so here, these people were describing, I was not doing well, There were some things missing in my life, personally and professionally. My friends told me to call you, but I didn't do it. And so what's interesting about that is that the reason they didn't call is that they were judgmental. And they thought that probably I would judge them. And imagine imagine how terrible that is, that a guy who's in the business, like for instance, of helping people solve problems, you would think he's going to judge you when actually that's the business I'm in. But and pride gets in the way. And so we're judging, even though they're not doing well and their friends are doing better, they're somehow judging this process, but not willing to check it out on their own. And then all of them described like coming to something or, doing something and then getting to meet us and see it. And then they were like, wow, I became a member, and whew, all these things started to happen. And so the first thing I want you to think about is that you're controlled by your judge, meaning that you think getting help maybe is not good. You think admitting your problems is not good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really not great. So I want you to imagine, if you would, I want you to draw two boxes. And in one box, I want you to imagine what we would call personal growth, like in the left-hand box, personal growth. And in the right-hand box, I want to call it professional growth. So if you think about that, the left-hand box is your life, your family, etc. And the right-hand box is your practice, your license, everything, your team. And so thinking about that for you, and as we were going through this process, and I want to talk about two particular words, and the first word is correlation, and the second word is toggle. So if you think about this, you have your personal life and you have your professional life. And so correlation is, looking at the relationship between two things. So what we want to look at today is the relationship between your personal life and your professional life and your professional life and your personal life. And obviously, correlation is link, association, relation, etc. And so as we were going through this in the event, I really wanted everyone to answer the question, is there a correlation between your personal growth and your professional growth? And this was even a discussion item at a table, and people were like resounding, yes, there is, and of course there is, and I've seen that, and so I even created a little diagram where, if your personal life is elevating, your professional life is elevating, and your personal life is declining, your professional life is declining, and sure enough, there's a correlation. But it's so weird because the only person, like if you say, can you see this objectively? Everyone says the answer is yes. But when your personal life is declining and your professional life is declining, it's really weird how the person who's actually having that happen can't see it. And, I thought a lot about that, and I've seen this a lot, right? I've seen it a lot. And then all of a sudden, some of my most successful clients are sitting there telling this story on a panel, and I'm looking at it going, that's exactly what was happening to them before they became a client, right? They were in a personal decline, a professional decline, things not really going well. They're denying it. And their friends are saying, hey, you should go here, they'll help you, et cetera, but they're going, no, I'm not going to go, right? I'm too proud to go. I don't want to go. I don't need it. And then they all described some like event that occurred, like some kind of a bottom, not like rock bottom, but a dental bottom or a doctor bottom, which is they're starting to run out of money or the line of credit or whatever it was, and then coming. And then they describe this personal increase followed by a professional increase, that their personal life had changed, and that by coming to and going through our process and committing to growth, that all of a sudden change started to occur. If it was losing weight, feeling better about themselves, it was building a better team, getting control of the business, whatever it was. So imagine, so again, is there a correlation between your personal growth and your professional growth? And I think you would agree, absolutely. But when you're in personal decline, no matter in what sort of way, is it harder to grow the business? And the answer is obviously a resounding yes. And so the next thing I want you to think about is this process. And so toggle is a mental decision to switch between two things. So when you think about it, if you're a doctor, and it was funny, I was doing an interview today with the head of PNC Bank, and we were talking about their appetite for financing things and whatnot, and they were talking about how they look at the person as a whole, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was thinking about that. I was like, so you're looking at them personally, professionally, combining it, right, a little bit. The answer is yeah. And so toggling is to switch from personal to professional. And then if you think about it, if you go over to professional, then we have ceilings, right? And it's funny, you have a mental ceiling on the personal side, and then there's a factual ceiling on the professional side. I'm not going to go into all of this, but I went on in the event to explain the difference between the mental ceiling and the professional ceiling, and very interestingly, they're totally different. And if you think about your practice, if you have 10 people in the practice, you have 10 personal ceilings inside the practice. So, and I wanted to make it clear that the only person who cannot toggle back and forth, the only person who can't see the correlation between the two is a person whose mental ceiling is closing in on them. In other words, the person whose mental personal ceiling is closing in can't see the correlation between what's happening to them and what's happening in the business. And it's so bizarre, but anyone on the outside could see it very easy. So, imagine that, like the difficulty of that. If you're a doctor and you have lost some motivation to engage in your practice and engage in your team, it's kind of like, this is almost like saying to a depressed person, a truly clinical depressed person saying, why don't you just, I've got an idea for you. Why don't you just be happy? It doesn't exactly work that way. So I was like, the whole thing was spinning in my head, and I was like, wow, I don't even know, like, what a puzzle this is, right? So, like, what if you're a doctor and your practice isn't going the way you want it, and you're too judgmental to be honest with anyone? You're not being totally transparent with your family. You're not being transparent with your friends. Your friends are actually saying to you, hey, you should hire Jay Geier. But you're saying, no, I don't need it. I'm too busy being unsuccessful, or too busy being stressed, or too busy doing whatever. And then and you're in a trap. Isn't that weird? But you're the only one who can't see it. And that there's actually something really wonderful and possible for you personally and professionally if you would choose to get on that track. And so when you think about running a practice, you have to successfully be able to toggle that. So number one, understand the correlation, and then you have to toggle back and forth, meaning that you have to be able to go home and be good personally, and then you have to switch it over, and you have to go to the practice, and you have to be good in the practice, and then you have to toggle back. Like, so a typical day works like you wake up, you have personal, you toggle to professional, you go to work all day, and then you got to toggle back to personal for those hours in the evening. And then in the morning you wake up, you're still in personal, and then you toggle back to professional, and this just goes on and on and on and on your whole life. And how you do this, is pretty critical, right? And so I was thinking about this, and I want to make this clear. This podcast is designed to help independent doctors to be successful in running successful practices. And so I really want you to take inventory of that for a second. And do you believe there's a correlation between personal growth and professional growth? And there's no way you could possibly say no. However, can you see it accurately in your own life? And the answer for most people is absolutely not. Now, the clients on the panel were having success. Like they're living these abundant lives, these full lives, a lot of things going well. They're having professional success well above the average practitioner. So they can look back and observe and see it and say, hey, I see the correlation and I see what I did. When I started to improve personally, I started to improve professionally. And when you improve professionally, many times you start to improve personally. So people hire me, and I want to make sure you understand this. So I'm interviewing the head of PNC Banks, and they're talking about we look at the whole person. I'm saying to you that there's this personal and professional situation. They're kind of under one roof, but they're competing with each other. Your practice is nothing but the compilation or the combined mental ceiling, personal ceiling of all the people that work there. So, somebody hires me to grow their practice. The first thing we do is we go in and we deal with all the people in the building and we get them to raise their mental ceiling. And the next thing you know, the practice goes up. So the question, for you to think about is, what is the correlation between personal development and personal growth and professional growth? And so this is what's funny. So you're going to tell me that if you go and you sign up for a 9-month tutorial in learning how to do a procedure, is learning how to do that procedure actually going to raise the professional ceiling of your practice? And it's kind of funny that it doesn't. I mean, it'll raise your skill level, but it's interesting that it doesn't necessarily raise your personal growth. It's like an element within the professional. So what I wanted you to be thinking about today was, well, wait a minute. So if this is true, what do you do? Well, number one, and again, the only person who can't see it is the person in personal decline. So, and when I got done giving this talk, people kept coming up to me and saying, Jay, that's so true. And I didn't realize that I was in a little bit of a personal mental decline. And I was thinking that no one was noticing. And I was like, well, we all notice. We just don't want to say it to you. So you can't hide this, by the way. And what I need to do, and everyone on this panel before they hired me, what they needed to do was to have a personal growth, that like they needed to feel better about themselves personally or do some things that stimulated themselves personally to have a positive effect on the professional, and to do the things professionally that would affirm you personally, right? And that these both need to go up. And oh, by the way, the 7 or 8 or 20 people in the practice, I got the same thing going on. So imagine if I work for a doctor who is in a mental decline and they're dropping all the personal mental ceilings, and now we're performing below the professional ceiling by a massive number, but we think it has nothing to do with it, right? That's a trap. That's where you get plateaued practice syndrome. That's where you get, oh, I've tried everything, nothing works. You get this sort of abysmal state of depression. But what I wanted to say to you was this, is that the interesting thing about it is that it's a trap, right? It's like a literal trap. And by the way, which one is more complex? Well, it's almost virtually impossible for a person in personal decline to help other people see things differently, right? And then is there a healthy, so the toggling stops, everything starts to jumble together, and there is no toggling back and forth between personal and professional, okay? And then that has massive side effects to what's going on. So there are actually 7 different things that are required on the personal self-development side, which is kind of interesting. It's personal skills, personal growth, personal power, personal improvement, personal empowerment, personal analysis, and personal objectives. I know that's a mouthful. And each of those have a set of things that goes with them. So it's kind of funny when we think about this. And if you misdiagnose it, and you guys are all doctors, so you understand the power of the diagnosis, but do you understand the power of the incorrect diagnosis and exactly what happens in that situation? So imagine, as an example, and by the way, if I were to walk you through, and I'll share some of these with you, these 7 pillars, what you would find it's the habits associated with these things. So for instance, you don't just become good at these, you practice the habits. Now, the problem with habits is that the easy habits are bad for you and the hard habits are good for you. I call it the habit conundrum. So the truth about habits, so when you think about that, if you develop a bunch of bad habits, which is really basically not developing good habits, is a better way to look at it. And what we do is we replace. So again, I'm going to say this again. So somebody's saying, hey, you should go do this. You should go do this. The person is not doing well, meaning there's problems, meaning they're not living up to the potential. They're not collecting enough money. The team is not as good as it needs to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like that story about, God sending the lifeboat, but you can't see it. So again, it'd be like, imagine a person who is clinically depressed, and, you just throw out some advice that says, be happy. You put a bumper sticker on their car and you say, be happy. It doesn't work like that. So you have to actually develop this whole series of good habits, or I should say hard habits that are good for you, and they displace the easy ones. I mean, it's just way easier to avoid problems than it is to go deal with it. And so I was just hoping today that you would, I don't know where you are in life and what's going on, but I just wanted to share this observation with you and to give you a little bit of encouragement and to get you to try to diagnose yourself and say, wait a minute, is my life in a personal, am I growing personally? So, and let's walk through some of those pillars of self-development that you have to practice on a daily basis. And you don't practice all 7 on a daily basis. You practice 1 today, 1 this afternoon, 1, and it has a cumulative effect. But is your pride gotten in the way and you're just in denial? And what's funny about it is, and here's the next recurring piece that I want you to get. To a person, and the guy was interviewing, these are my clients, and he said, well, how come it took you so long to do it? And they said, I was busy. I'm too busy. And so I got to meet with probably a half a dozen or a dozen non-members just in conversation during this 2 days. I mean, a lot of people there, but met them in the hallway, or they're someone's brother. They brought their brother. There's a lot of referred people, so I wanted to give them attention. And so they come up and they start telling me their situation. And again, there it is, every one of them. I'm like, well, how come you don't just do this? And they're all busy. I mean, like that is the number one characteristic of somebody in decline, that they are so busy that they can't change the way they think or how they're doing things. And they can't even take a day. Like, it's such chaos that they're such on that gerbil wheel or whatever, the hamster wheel, that they're just describing this vividly to me, like, I just don't have time. I don't have time. And I was thinking about that time trap, like when things aren't going well at work. That's so true, because it like there's no amount, you can't work your way out of it, but that's actually not the problem, right? So what are a couple of the things that we're talking about here? So for instance, and it's always interesting, the first thing I do when I take on a client is we run a lot of tests on them, And the first one of these is personal skills, which is knowing yourself. I mean, I just think it's so fascinating that a person in decline, if I say, tell me about yourself, they don't tell me about themselves. They tell me about their circumstances, right? But but instead, I have to teach people, like, wait a minute, what are your skills? What are the ways in which you think? And by the way, all this is testable, right? So like we can test it, and it's just, it holds true, right? So every single person should know like all the cheat code on themselves, but yet they don't know the cheat code on themselves because they're too busy to even learn about the cheat code on themselves. Like, think about how ironic that is, or how depressing it is, or I don't know what you want to call it, but it's not good, right? So yeah, I can't get away. And so it's kind of like a prison sentence, like it's not going well, but if I leave, it's going to fall apart. Well, isn't that interesting? So that's what I mean by a personal decline. You can't see the truth. I mean, that's actually not true, right? It's just what you think. So the next one is personal growth. And so that's having a growth mindset, which not everybody has. And then that's where you're making every day better than the day before. So for instance, and that's personally and professionally, and it's developing relationships. So, imagine, I think it's always interesting how, we teach a system of how you toggle back and forth between your personal and your professional, and the daily habits that are required to make those passes come true. And one of them, as an example, is this early morning ritual, where you have this intentional transition out of your personal into your professional before you go to work. And it's funny how I think about a lot of people, they just sort of wake up and they go to the office every day and they don't make that transition. So question for you, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are 7 of them, right? And they're pretty significant, and they're important, right? And so people either are practicing the daily habits of developing themselves, or they're in decline. It's not one or the other. You're either doing the habits or you're not. So if you think about that, it's kind of crazy, right? So you say, well, what evidence is there that you're doing it, right? Versus evidence that you're not. So what I'd love for you to do, like I think a good thing for you to do would be to think about this. I want you to make 2 lists. And on the first list, I want you to list the habits that you practice that are easy, maybe bad habits. Easy habits. You watching the news? Are you having a drink after work? Are you watching too much Netflix? Are you avoiding conflict? Like, make a list of the habits that you find. And again, these are pretty prevalent every day, right? So easy and sometimes bad habits, and make that list. Overreacting versus thinking first, right? I had a speaker, such an interesting line. They said, what was the opposite of trust? And the answer is, it's not trusting. The opposite of trust is control. So remember, this person who can't get away from the office is just controlling and controlling and controlling, and things are slipping through their hands, right? So now then make another list, and let's call them the hard but good habits. Hard but good, right? So 7 o'clock rolled around this morning, and my trainer meets me in the basement in the gym, and I show up, and it's really not hard, but not everybody does it. And 7 o'clock rolls around, and so what are the things that your habits that require some sacrifice, and then ask yourself, are they good or are they bad? And so what you'll find is there's a correlation between, again, the easy habits many times are bad for us. The harder habits are very good for us. Like, one of the habits people have to get away from is they have to get away from their office sometimes. Like, personal decline happens when you stay in the same place day in and day in and day in and out. You never get out of it and look at it from above or from afar and decide how to change it. So what are your daily habits? Are you improving personally and professionally, or are you actually kind of declining and you're not seeing the correlation between the two? This is what I want you to think about today. And I hope there's something that you can take out of that. And look, I can tell you this, that you generally first have to sort of diagnose yourself correctly. And what I notice is people, what's cool is when people decide they want to get help, like the minute you get help, you start to change, which is kind of a powerful process, meaning that it doesn't mean all your problems are gone, but if you make a commitment to do what's right, you will immediately feel better about your future. If you just keep doing the same thing, you may not necessarily feel better about your future. Now, some things take a little more time. So I hope that you can take something out of this message today. And this really isn't for you. This is really for you, meaning this isn't hypothetical for someone else. I'm actually asking you to stop for a minute and think about this. And can you actually say that everything personally is increasing and everything professionally is increasing? Or is it that, no, there's massive opportunities for improvement here, and you're that person who somebody keeps saying, hey, you should do this and you do this, and it keeps going over your head, like you're missing it. And then obviously, listen, if you need help from us, what I would suggest is, call my office. We do a thing called a Discovery Day. Come to one of my events, but whatever it takes, right? Like you have to come, and then you have to study it, and that's the beginning steps, right? But it isn't, and I hope that there's that you can accurately look at the correlation between those two things. And something I said today, and look, I didn't want to talk hypothetically about your friend who has this condition, which we certainly could do. And if you're saying, what is he? If you're still confused at what I'm saying, then apply it over to a friend. Like, do you have a friend that things aren't going really well for, and you can see there's personal and professional decline, and does your friend see it that way, or are they missing it, right? That kind of thing. And then switch it back over and say, well, wait a minute, what's the difference between your friend and what's the difference between you? All right, so food for thought for today. I will talk to you soon, and remember that don't let anybody tell you that you cannot have the practice of your dreams. Don't let anybody tell you that the only way you're going to be successful is if you sell your practice to them. The DSO propaganda machine is hot and active, and these brokers are just all over the place. And they are just so interesting, right? It's like, oof, they just want to get their little piece of the action, right? And do they really care about what happens to you? That is the $1 million question. And remember, when your friend sells their practice to a DSO and the multi-level scheme begins, they have to get another person in there, and so they're going to get paid to refer you in there. And it's just important that you understand all of the mechanics of that, and that you do what you need to do to protect your family's personal financial situation and stay in the business of serving your patients at the absolute highest level. So, all right, we'll talk soon. Have a fantastic day. Take care. Bye.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Private Practice Playbook. For clips of this episode, go ahead and check out the YouTube channel. If you enjoyed what you heard today, make sure to subscribe to the podcast at podcastfordoctors.com to unlock subscriber-only bonus episodes. Find our links below in the description.